When military crises erupt around the globe, the U.S. Army calls on its Rapid Reaction Forces. This video ordnance program examines one of the best-known units of this elite force, the 82nd Airborne Division. Parachutes were invented to save airmen in the event of problems with their aircraft or balloon. But in the 1930s, several armies began experimenting with them for military operations. Parachutes opened up the possibility of dropping a force deep behind enemy lines where enemy defenses were weakest. World War II saw the first extensive use of airborne forces in such famous battles as Airborne and Crete. The U.S. Army's best-known airborne divisions in World War II were the 82nd, nicknamed the All-American, and the 101st, nicknamed the Screaming Eagles. These early airborne units used two methods of delivery into combat zones. The best-known and most widely used technique was the parachute, but the divisions could also deliver a portion of their troops, as well as heavy equipment, by glider. These gliders were towed behind the transport aircraft and released near the landing zone. The 82nd's first airborne operation was during the 1943 invasion of Sicily, followed by later combat actions at Salerno and Anzio in Italy. The 82nd earned a hard-won reputation, with the Germans calling them those devils in the baggy pants. The 82nd and 101st took part in the massive airborne attacks that initiated the D-Day invasion of Normandy in June 1944. Their last major airborne drop of the war took place in the Arnhem operation in the Netherlands, where the 82nd Airborne seized the Nijmegen Bridge. In the post-war years, the technology of troop insertion began to change with the advent of the helicopter. Helicopters could deliver forces deep behind enemy lines instead of parachutes or gliders. The 101st Airborne was converted into a heliborne force, now being called the 101st Air Assault Division as a result of this change. But parachutes still have their place in modern warfare. Helicopters can deliver a force a few hundred miles, but are limited by the range of the helicopters. Paratroopers can be delivered to objectives much further, since their transport aircraft have ranges of several thousand miles. As a result, the U.S. Army's Contingency Corps has both a heliborne and a paratrooper division.
The difference between the 101st and the 82nd, we're both in the same contingency corps, and once we're on the ground, physically on the ground, our capabilities in the infantry battalions are very similar. The significant difference is the training time that it takes to be a paratrooper, insertion by parachute, as compared to insertion by helicopters. We both have to focus on that entry technique, and those require some intensive training both at the individual level and at the command levels.
The 82nd Airborne Division has been an essential element of the Army's Rapid Reaction Forces for over a decade, seeing combat in Grenada in 1983 and in Panama in 1989. In 1990, after Iraq had invaded Kuwait, it was the 82nd Airborne Division that was rushed to Saudi Arabia to draw the line in the sand, signaling the U.S. intention to resist further Iraqi aggression. These operations all highlighted a primary mission requirement of the division, the need to be able to deploy a combat-ready force at a moment's notice.
The mission of the 82nd Airborne Division is to deploy anywhere in the world within 18 hours of notification, conduct a parachute assault, conduct follow-on combat operations in support of the national objectives. Primarily, the reason the 82nd Airborne Division is unique is that it has a strategic forced entry capability. And what that means is the division has the ability to be deployed and inserted into a hostile environment without a secure airfield to support its operations.
The 82nd Airborne Division maintains a rapid reaction capability through vigorous peacetime training and continuous preparations. At all times, the division maintains a portion of its forces, called the Division Ready Force, on an alert status, ready to go into action anywhere around the globe.
The Division Ready Brigade concept, or the Division Ready Force concept, is structured around a combined arms team. It is a mix of infantry, armor, artillery, military intelligence, engineer, and logistics type assets. So it is a combined arms team.
With its proud history and demanding mission, the 82nd Airborne has long been considered one of the U.S. Army's elite formations. The 82nd has been able to meet its requirements by depending on volunteer soldiers.
The troopers of the 82nd Airborne Division are twice volunteers. They first volunteer to come into the Army, then they volunteer to become an airborne soldier. He has to pass the test, so to speak, in order to come into the division. First, he successfully passes his basic and advanced infantry training, and then he must go through the grueling airborne school that is part of the United States Army. So that twice volunteer status makes him a unique and highly motivated soldier.
The hallmark of the airborne soldier is the parachute. When going into a combat jump, the paratrooper will be heavily burdened with equipment. Over his regular combat equipment webbing, the paratrooper wears a special harness. The main parachute is attached to the rear of this harness. In front, the paratrooper attaches a reserve parachute, which is a safety backup in case of problems with the main parachute. The airborne soldier's individual weapon is carried in an M1950 weapons case. The soldier's Alice pack, or rucksack, is suspended off the front of the harness. The main parachute is designed to land the paratrooper safely, even during jumps from under 1,000 feet. In total, the paratrooper carries about 150 to 180 pounds of equipment.
The T-10 Bravo and Charlie parachutes, which you saw inside, are 35 foot in diameter, and they fall at a rate of descent of approximately 15 feet per second. This allows the paratrooper to land safely. That parachute is also designed to bring 350 pounds safely to the ground. It is also designed to open quickly, and the division jumps at low altitudes, so that parachute has to act as designed every time.
When inside the aircraft preparing to jump, the paratrooper's static line is attached to the anchor line in the aircraft. Upon jumping, the weight of the paratrooper breaks a pack closing tie when the end of the 15-foot static line is reached. When this happens, the parachute deployment bag comes free of the pack tray. Two connector link ties then break, and the suspension lines are pulled out of the stow loops of the deployment bag. Finally, two locking stows disengage, and the canopy is pulled from the deployment bag. The entire process takes about 4 seconds from exiting the aircraft to full inflation of the parachute's canopy. As the paratrooper approaches the ground, he can lower his equipment to reduce the risks during landing.
You have a lanyard that lowers your equipment. It's a lowering line, call it the hook pile tape lowering line. And what it does is it attaches to your Alice pack routes it through your M1950 weapons case and then to a D-ring that's attached to the main parachute harness. And once you get approximately 200 feet above ground, you look down below you to make sure you're not lowering your equipment on anyone. Then you just go ahead and lower your equipment. This allows you to have more freedom of movement to curl up into your prepare to land attitude when you're getting ready to conduct your PLF. Keeping the equipment on you, it causes damage to the equipment and possibly injure the paratrooper himself.
The inherent risk in parachute jumps has led to a series of overlapping safety features during airborne operations. One of the most obvious methods is the second parachute worn by the paratrooper, called a reserve chute.
The reserve parachute is the backup system for that main parachute should it fail. Its canopy is smaller in size. It's a 24-foot diameter canopy. Its opening is aided with a pilot parachute, and it opens very quickly. Its rate of descent is somewhat faster. It will not bring down as much weight, but it's designed to open super quick. So if he has a problem, he's got a life-saving device right there in front of him.
Since airborne operations are conducted from low altitudes, every effort is made to ensure that the main chute operates every time. Preparing parachutes for operations is the responsibility of the division's 407th Supply and Transport Battalion.
We have many safeguards in our inspection process of the parachutes we pack. Since we've come home from Saudi Arabia, we've packed over 83,000 personnel parachutes, and we have not had one that has a rigger-related malfunction. We do this, our process of ensuring that we have a safe parachute is a parachute from the time it's taken off the drop zone and shaken to the packing procedure, back onto the back of a paratrooper going out of an airplane. It's inspected no less than 5 times. So that parachute undergoes a tremendous amount of scrutiny before it ever goes back on somebody's back.
During peacetime operations, the paratrooper bundles the parachute into a kit bag after the drop. If this was a wartime situation, the paratrooper wouldn't take time to bother with this. Bundling the parachute after jumps is the first step in ensuring that the parachutes remain undamaged and safe to use.
Once a parachute is recovered from the drop zone by the unit that has jumped the parachute, it is taken to the shakeout facility, which is adjacent to the pack facility, and it's shaken out to make sure that all debris is removed from the parachute, and they attempt to remove any tangles in the suspension lines in order that when the parachute comes to us, it's able to be packed with ease. Once it's through being shaken out at the shakeout facility, they send it to the pack facility, and it is then inspected by a parachute rigger and packed.
The pack facility at Fort Bragg is the largest of its kind in the United States Armed Forces. The paratrooper's safety is the platoon's key concern.
There's one parachute rigger that packs the parachute. There's also an in-process inspector working with that rigger who lays out the parachute, and ensures that it is in proper layout for the rigger. And while he or she is packing the chute, that same in-process inspector is inspecting the parachute while it's being packed. Once it has been packed by that rigger, then it goes to a final inspector who gives it a final inspection. So basically what you have is one soldier packing the parachute and 2 additional parachute riggers that are inspecting it while he or she is packing it. There's a log record book that is attached to every parachute, and it identifies the serial number of the parachute and of the deployment bag, and the packer who packs the chute signs it, as well as the final inspector who inspects the parachute signs it as well. So if there is any malfunction, that parachute that will tell us who packed it. It tells us the number of the deployment bag, which stays inside the aircraft, and the name of the soldier who inspected it. So that's our way of being able to track who packed it. And that's their way of, they know that every time they sign their name to a chute that we know who did it. So it's a little bit of a gut check for them also.
Although the 82nd Airborne is primarily a light infantry force, its task forces include a variety of heavy equipment to support the paratroopers during combat missions.
The 82nd Airborne Division always deploys its battalions as task force. A battalion task force in this division consists of approximately 730 soldiers. The basis for the task force organization is the infantry battalion. But also assigned to the task force is an artillery battery consisting of 6 105 howitzers, a light armor platoon consisting of 4 M551 Sheridans, an engineer platoon, an air defense platoon, a military police squad, and a military intelligence element.
This heavy equipment has to be dropped into the landing zone along with the paratroopers. This can range in size from single containers of ammunition or other supplies all the way up to armored vehicles like the M551 Sheridan. The 82nd uses a variety of special techniques to ensure that the heavy loads will arrive safely in the drop zone. These troops are preparing a Humvee 5/4-ton truck for a parachute drop.
The ring for a Humvee consists of a 16-foot platform. That's a large aluminum platform made up of different panels, side rails, and end boards, which are just components of the platform. That's like the base of the heavy drop load, if you will. Then on top of that, put honeycomb stacks, and what those are stacks configured to help cushion the shock on impact for the vehicle. Then the vehicle is actually lashed onto that platform and onto those honeycomb stacks. Again, that's just to make sure that as little damage is done to the vehicle as possible. And then additional honeycomb is put on top of the vehicle to make sure that nothing happens to it. Then we also have parachutes on top of that, 2 parachutes in the case of a Humvee. Well, our riggers are really proficient. This is the one crew that does this all the time. And for a Humvee, we can estimate about an hour and 15 minutes once we get into the rigging.
Especially heavy loads like the M551 Sheridan armored vehicle require special attention. There are 2 methods for delivering such loads into the drop zone.
We have a heavy drop, which normally would take 8 G11 size parachutes to heavy drop, and they are loaded onto a platform and basically are pulled out of the aircraft, this opening the parachutes, allowing for land. We have a LAPES operation, which is a low altitude parachute insertion, and this is basically where the aircraft flies real low and the tank on the pallet is pulled, extracted from the aircraft, and has somewhat of a rough landing, but it kind of slides across the terrain or the ground.
LAPES allows for the delivery of heavy loads without the need for so many large cargo parachutes, but it does demand considerable skill on the part of the airlift pilot.
Basically what that does is the parachutes come out of the airplane, the C-130 will go down very low to the ground. The parachutes will come out and they'll act as an air anchor and actually just pull the load out. Now the load's on a special type of platform, what we talked about before, the base of the load. It's a special kind of platform with a special kind of nose on it so that prevents the vehicle from tipping over as it actually drags on the ground and is slowed down by the parachutes. Now that is different from the rest of the loads that we do because those come out higher up and, like I said, about 800 feet under full canopy.
The M551 Sheridan armored vehicle is unique to the 82nd Airborne Division. The Sheridan was originally designed to serve as an Army scout tank as well as for air mobile operations. The Army is reluctant to call it a tank since it is much more lightly armored than the main battle tanks. Instead, it is officially dubbed an Armored Reconnaissance Air Assault Vehicle. It has been replaced in other armored divisions by a cavalry version of the Bradley fighting vehicle. The 82nd Airborne Division is the only unit to still use the Sheridan in its original role. The Sheridan was designed to combine lightweight with heavy firepower. Its 152mm weapon is a unique combination of missile launcher and gun, capable of firing either a guided Shillelagh anti-tank missile or a more conventional unguided projectile. The Sheridan is the only U.S. Army armored vehicle which is routinely parachuted. The Sheridan crews are a unique breed of tankers, not only needing to be competent as armored vehicle crews, but airborne qualified as well.
Ordinarily for training, we have separate aircraft. The heavy drop loads go on one bird, and we jump in off the other ones. One of the things we've developed for combat operations, like I said before, is the tailgate, where the tank and the crew will both be on one aircraft. As soon as the heavy drop load exits, and the crew will follow the tank out so they get closer to the load on the ground.
The unique demands of airborne operations have led the 82nd to stress lightweight and portability in their support weapons. Weapons like these give the division added combat punch. Delivering the paratroopers to their distant objectives is the task of the U.S. Air Force's military airlift units. An important element in division planning is the close relationship between the airborne forces and the airlift squadrons. The 82nd Airborne's North Carolina base at Fort Bragg is co-located with Pope Air Force Base, home of a number of transport squadrons.
The relationship between the 82nd Airborne Division and the Air Force is an integral one. Without their support, without the support of the Military Airlift Command, we would be incapable of conducting our mission. We enjoy a close relationship with the Air Force, with the close proximity of Fort Bragg and Pope Air Force Base. We train literally on a daily basis with the Air Force. Without them, it would be very, very difficult for us to do our job. And it's important that we really do operate in a joint environment because of the close working relationship we have with the Air Force, because of the operations we do in conjunction with the Marines. We really operate in a joint environment.
Delivering paratroopers is not as easy as it might seem. One of the greatest concerns facing airborne commanders is landing their forces in a very tight pattern and avoiding wide dispersion. This means that the airlift aircraft will have to fly in close formation. This is further complicated by the fact that nearly all wartime combat drops and many peacetime training drops are conducted in the darkness of night.
What's extremely difficult for a jet pilot is trying to drop in formation like they're doing here tonight. These 6 personnel birds will be lined up in fairly close formation order. They'll have to slow down to 130 miles per hour, which is almost at stall speed for a C-141. That's the speed required so that the jumper can exit without a whole lot of shock. As they slow down, they're also trying to avoid the wingtip vortices created from the aircraft in front of it. They're also making sure that the aircraft below is not lower than the one in front of it for obvious reasons. If, for example, they enter stall speed or get into some turbulent air, bad air they call it, that following aircraft can dip down suddenly and cause some real hazards to jumpers that may be exiting in front of it. So it's a very nerve-wracking exercise for the pilots to try to maintain formation, find a DZ that, as you'll see very soon as they're going over at night, is completely blacked out except for a few markings, and be able to line up on that DZ, exit everyone safely, and requires a great deal of concentration from the entire air crew inside the 141s. These are great guys. We enjoy working with them. And the more we can work with them, the Air Force, the better they get. And of course, the more we like it.
Night drops may be difficult for the airlift crews, but they are a definite advantage to the paratrooper. The most recent combat jump for the 82nd Airborne in Panama was a nighttime drop.
The night jump going into Panama was a definite experience to go in. Tensions were high. People were basically being part of the new generation aside from the old Vietnam era, and even prior to that. Going into this for us was a chance for the 82nd to conduct its first airborne operations in quite some time. So initially everyone that was there were young, new faces. Looking around for some sort of confidence from other fellow mates was really non-existent. You had to basically grab your own gumption and go out for what you know. Basically, what you're looking at is everybody, it's first time for everyone. So there's really no one to look at other than the training that you've done all these years prior to it paid off for us, is what it did. If you have a mission in mind, and if you have a mission and that's on your mind, jumping into the nighttime is really a plus for you. So it's more of an asset than it is of an enemy because, for one, it cuts down your possibility of getting spotted or seen. So it's basically it's a friend for you. So I prefer to jump at nighttime. I think anybody who does it for sport may prefer daytime jumps. But for those of us who do this for a living, something that has a tactical value, you'll see a night jump is definitely a plus for you.
The routine of today's airborne jump would be familiar to a paratrooper from World War II. As the paratroopers wait to board the aircraft, the traditional ritual of the paratroopers takes place. The jump masters and their assistants carefully check each soldier to make certain that no harness is out of place, no line tangled. There is no excuse for accidents. Burdened by the heavy load of their parachutes and equipment, the airborne soldiers struggle out to the aircraft. It's not surprising that the 82nd Airborne places great importance on peak physical training for its troops. Once aboard the aircraft, the paratroopers settle in for the trip to the landing zone. In peacetime, the trip is seldom more than a few hours. But for overseas deployments, it can be over 10 hours. Inside the cavernous hold of the aircraft, the paratroopers anxiously await the signal to get up and attach their static lines. No matter how careful the planning and how thorough the training, there is always an element of danger in parachute jumps. On approach to the drop zone, the pilot signals the jump masters in the rear of the aircraft that the drop zone is approaching. The jump master waits for the green light, and the first sticks of paratroopers are soon exiting the aircraft. With its legendary heritage of heroic exploits, the 82nd Airborne Division has been the shock force of the U.S. Army for 5 decades. When a crisis arises, the Army knows it can depend on the combat skills of the airborne.